Hey everyone, in today's video I'm going to be teaching you guys how to make epic hyperlapses. So there's a few ways you could do this, using a tripod, handheld, or using a gimbal. Now I don't like the tripod because it's usually more time consuming and also more meticulous. My preferred method is usually handheld or using a gimbal. Now when shooting using a gimbal or handheld, there's a few things you want to keep in mind. When shooting handheld, I prefer to take my photos with a viewfinder rather than the LCD screen, and what that helps with is keep the shot steady and also at the same level between every photo, and that helps with stabilization later. Another tip is to have your leveler displaying on the camera when you're taking photos. What that helps with is keeping photos at the same level between shot to shot, because you may have aligned the points but it could be slightly rotated. Now for the hyperlapse itself, you usually want to have your grid on the camera, and what you do is find an interesting subject, a building that you want to move either towards or around. So you want to line up a point on the grid with the structure from photo to photo. This is how it's going to look like. As you can see in this example, I've aligned a point on the grid with this tower and I've taken a photo. I've moved 2 steps to the left, I've aligned it again at the same point, and I've taken another photo. I'd repeat this process until I have about 200 photos, and that gives me about 4 to 5 seconds. So you line it up, take a photo, line it up again, take another photo. And between each photo, you want to be moving at least 1 to 2 steps, or however many steps you want, depending on the distance you want to span. Usually I prefer 1 step for short distances and 2 steps or 3 steps for longer distances. Now, a thing you want to keep in mind about interval is that if there are clouds, then you're going to want to make sure the interval is consistent between shot to shot. Otherwise, you'd have a jump in the clouds, as you can see here. Now, using a gimbal usually has limitations, but it's my preferred method because it's the fastest. I usually use this for forward to backwards movements. I've also managed to use it on side-to-side movements, but it's usually harder to align the subject in the middle and pan around it. However, I've managed to use it and I'll show you the example later on in post. Now that's it for in-camera stuff. Now I'm going to show you how to edit these. So I'm here in Premiere. You could use whatever program you want. The concept's about the same. And what you're going to want to do is import your image sequence first. So I'm going to double click here, navigate to my image sequence, or the hyperlapse I took. Now I've navigated to my hyperlapse, and I'm going to click the first image and make sure that image sequence here is checked. That tells Premiere that we have an image sequence, and how it tells that is by the numbers. So it imports 23, 24, 25, 26, and so on until the end. Now that I've pressed import, so right here we have our image sequence, which is now as a clip. As you can see here, it's 29.97 FPS, about 30 FPS. You can change that to 24 if you want by going right clicking on it, modify, interpret footage, and assume this frame rate and enter whatever frame rate you want. I usually like to keep it at 30 so that it hits a little faster. Now what I'm going to do is right click, new sequence from clip. Now as we can scrub through it, we can see that it's very, very shaky. So what we're going to do next is apply, and what we're going to do next is drag the warp stabilizer on it, and it's going to start analyzing. So I'm going to wait for this to analyze and I'll come back to you after that. Now sometimes after applying warp stabilizer, you're going to realize that there are some weird artifacts or warping effects that kind of look weird. So what you're going to want to do is reduce the smoothness and change subspace warp into position scale rotation. Now sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. I'll show you what you could do if that doesn't work and you still get that warping. And if it does work, what you're going to want to do is reduce the smoothness to about 20, place it on position scale rotation, and then nest the sequence again. I like to speed it up after placing the first warp stabilizer, and then I nest it again and I apply the warp stabilizer once again. And what that does is it's pretty much analyzing a slightly more stabilized footage, so it kind of makes it easier to analyze and stabilize. I've already analyzed it here. I've dragged warp stabilizer, Now here's what the finished result looks like after stabilizing it about twice and speeding it up. You don't have to speed it up, but I just prefer to speed it up to have a faster hyperlapse. And here's what it looks like. Now if this stabilization does not work, there is an advanced stabilization method that I'm going to leave a link to in the description below. It does involve After Effects and it's a lot more time consuming, but the results are more guaranteed. Now as for the Gimbal Hyperlapse, now this is what I was talking about with the Gimbal Hyperlapse. I've panned over here side to side on this mosque over here. As you can see, it's quite slow. But you can see that the mosque doesn't stay in the center of the frame throughout the whole clip. So what I've done here is I've placed Warp Stabilizer on about 30% and placed it once again on position, scale, and rotation. I've nested it again and applied Warp Stabilizer, this time at 100%. What happens is every time you nest it, you're pretty much analyzing a more stabilized version of that clip, so it kind of makes it easier. Try to stabilize it to a point where there's no weird jiggly effects or artifacts or warping. That's what I try to do. Now after the fourth time I've nested it, I finally sped it up. But this time what I've done is I've added a zoom effect, a digital zoom on the mosque itself. And this gives it like a kind of cool effect. And also if there's any warping or weird artifacts in the surroundings, it kind of masks it out. And this is how it looks like. So what I've done is I've set 2 keyframes at the beginning where the clip starts, and then I've moved to the end of the clip. And I placed 2 more keyframes for scale. I've scaled it about 200% and I positioned it where the mosque is centered. And I think this gives it a cool effect. It's definitely not perfect, but I was short on time and I couldn't do the more advanced one. So I've had to settle for one with slight artifacts. So this is a perfect example of a hyperlapse with a gimbal. It is doable. The results are comparable as well. You get some really nice results and it's the quickest method. This only took about 15 seconds. So that's it for this tutorial. Hope you guys learned something. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up. It helps a lot. And I'll see you all in the next video.